Good morning. Um, Sealand Open is coming up, and of course, since I'm hosting it, I have to do a meta video on it. So this is it, and I'm just going to find. There we go. So the meta of Sealand Open 2023. Now the event itself is a 1,000 points event. It is Swiss draw 5 games over 2 days. The games will be a mix of objective missions and kill points missions and movement missions, so sectors and envelopment, double envelopment stuff. And you can bring 1,000 points of generic reinforced platoons, because you can bring two. So that's more or less what we're seeing here, and yeah. The order dice for the event, they are on average, you get 15.4 order dice, a little lower for the Axis powers, a little higher for the allies, um, which is not uncommon, I think. Depending on which Axis powers you see, they struggle a little bit on order dice most of the time. And the allies do have some builds where you can build quite high order dice lists. So the range band is between 12 order dice and 23. We're not seeing that many 12, 13 order dice. Only 4 lists have 12 or 13 order dice, so that's very, very few. The most common to bring would be 14 to 15 order dice, which is basically also what I would expect for 1,000 points. Unless we're seeing tank platoons, then it may turn out to be a little lower. Um, Surprisingly, there's quite a few that have 16 to 17 order dice. So 8 lists bring 16, 17 order dice, which is fairly high. And then we're seeing only 2 lists that are more or less spam lists. We have one that's a 19 order dice list, an American one, I believe. Yes. And then we have a 23 order dice list, which is French. So those are the very high end of spamming order dice. The nations, these are heavily skewed towards the allies. As you can see, we only get 5 German and 3 other Axis powers, Finnish, Italian, and Romanian. I had allowed for this event the version 2 of the Italians to be used, but didn't lure many people to using Italian, so only 1 Italian. But for the Allies, we have 10 Soviet armies. 10. So that is an insane amount, the most common army at all. And basically, we have more Soviets than we have Axis powers. Then we have 5 American armies, which is a surprise to me as well. The Americans are turning out to be very popular for this event, and some of them are really good. And then only 2 British armies, which was also a huge surprise since the Brits did very well at the WTC. So I had thought that they would basically be a very, very popular army, but they're not that popular. 1 Polish and 1 French. The army builds. Now, if you don't know what the army builds are, go and watch my video on army builds, link in the description. Now, 13 of the lists had what I call mixed bag elements. That's half of the lists. That's when you have you got all the different teams, so you make sure that you have a little bit of everything. You've got uh, yeah, your infantry maybe has some skirmish capabilities, but also some engineers and flamethrowers. So you build so that you have a lot of tools in your bag, and I see a lot of this, quite a lot. 3 lists had Death Star elements, so and that's a little bit depending on what you define a Death Star to be, but for me, that's if you bring a heavy tank. But it's also if you bring large unit of body armored engineers, for instance, for the Soviets. And we are seeing 1 list that has quite a lot of body armored personnel in their infantry section. We have 8 lists that have pseudo tank or tank-ish elements, so where you have 3 or more armored vehicles in your platoon. And this is particularly done when people bring double platoons. That's where it often happens. Um, had I thought to see more of these? Maybe. But I guess it's fairly popular. It is a fairly good build. It is a build that can get you places. We had 4 lists that had hold elements, so either you're spamming a lot of inexperienced infantry, so just spamming small units of those, or you have like huge amount of bodies on the table. Um, so both of the order-dice spam lists actually fall into this category a little bit as well because they're bringing a lot of inexperienced units. Some of them, one of them, and the other is bringing a lot of very small units. We have 1 cavalry heavy list, Polish, unsurprising. Um, we have 2 barbecue lists, which is a little bit surprising, I guess. But people are focusing a lot more this year on mixed bag with elements of flamethrowers and barbecue. So we're not seeing that many true barbecue lists, even in among the Americans. And we have 2 lists that rely on forward deployers, what I call forward deployment lists. Um, these are going to be really interesting to watch. One of them is Jan Peterson, who is bringing an American Scouts list, so the FSSF Scouts, and the other is Michael Christensen of the Danish WTC 1 team, who is bringing a Soviet list that has a lot of forward deployment elements. Both of them will be interesting to see. I'm guessing they're doing this to win the scenarios where forward deployment is allowed. They see an advantage in that. Right. My list rankings rank from 2 to 4. I'm not seeing any like true 5 lists. I'm not seeing any true 1 list bad lists. So and I think I only had a single, yeah, I had a single 2, which was 1 list that I thought was, well, this is not competitive. This is a player who just uh, likes his list, likes what he's doing. I don't think this is competitive. And then I have a few which are from newer players, I guess, or players who are doing something very unusual, where I think this is not what I would expect to see at tournaments. I give them a 2.5. Um, they may surprise. At least one of the players I know is really good and knows his list, so he may surprise just because he knows his list. And but I don't think the list in itself is very good. I'm saying this, and I still lost to that list, Steen. Um, but overall, I'm seeing a lot of 3s and a lot of 3.5s, a lot of those. So good competitive lists and standard competitive lists. The average for the allies for me is a little higher than the Axis powers. For me, the average for allies is a 3.3, so there's a few more that bumps it up. And for the Axis powers, it's a 3. So yeah. What are my predictions for the top 5? Well, basically, I think that Pim with his 15 organized Russians, um, that's a mixed bag platoon with a lot of flamers, including flamer tanks, which I guess if he can get them to work, if he can push them up towards the enemy and push them into range, they're going to be deadly. But the trick is to get them up there, of course. I think Pim might do very well, also because he's a very, very good player. He's on the not the Polish, he's on the Dutch WTC team, and he knows his stuff. So I think that he might really do well with a 15 authorized Russian list. It's basically one of those lists where I think, well, this is really good. Um, then I have Michael Fier in top 5. Fier is on the Danish WTC team, and he's bringing his 15 authorized Polish. The Polish are very difficult to handle. It's an assault-oriented list, and it's got a lot of different support elements. So they're very, very tough, and if he can get them to connect with the enemy, he's going to be really difficult stopping. I also put Michael C of the Danish WTC team in my top 5. Again, 15 order dice Soviets here, with forward deployers and support. It's a very, very good list. He has one glaring weakness, and that is he hasn't got a lot of large infantry units, but his infantry units are very survivable, and he can deploy them where they need to go. So I think that he might end up in the top 5 as well. Then I have Geordie. Geordie is bringing a 23 order dice French list. It's got horde elements, it's got HE, and it's got order dice spam. I really like this list, Geordie. It's got all that you need. So yeah, I think that might do well. It's a very scary list. It's got loads of infantry units that are really problematic. And then I think Mark Hovitz Christensen, also of the Danish WTC teams, with his 17 order dice Brits, it's basically the same list that he brought to the WTC. It's focused on assault, it's got Gurkhas, and he's got a lot of support for that. If he can get that to connect with the enemy, I think he will do well as well. So that is my top 5 prediction based on lists and a little bit of knowing the players. But I also reached out to some of the international players, many of whom you have seen featured on this channel before, to hear what their predictions were. Basically, I got 3 guys to help me with choosing the coolest list, and the coolest list is not the best list, so not the most competitive. But I also got them to sort of give me a top 5 prediction for what is going to happen here, and these are their predictions. So I'll start with Alistair. Alistair is the Scottish WTC captain. He is a Scottish champion and a TO, and he has very good skills with this. He puts Michael Fee's Polish in his top 5. Again, we know why it's there. He also says that Geordie has a good chance. Again, we know why it's there. These 2 lists are very, very strong. He also takes Danny from the Dutch team into his top 5. It's got 17 order dice. It's Americans. It's got barbecue elements and armor and multi-rocket launcher. A really good list and a good order dice count as well. It's high. So that might do well. And Danny is a good player as well. Lucas from my gaming club here, he also is in the top 5, and he has a pretty similar list to Danny's. It's again a 16 order dice American list. It's got barbecue elements, it's got armor, stewards, and it's got support, including a multi-rocket launcher. So they're very, very similar, and based just on lists, I can see where Alistair's coming from. I don't particularly like this American build, this barbecue armor multi-rocket launcher build, but it might do well. It might, yes. And finally, we have Jan Peterson's 19 order dice American MSU spam with the FSSF scouts and their support units. Again, because you have so many order dice, that turns into a really good build, and it might end up in the top 5. It'll be interesting to see. So that was Alistair's top 5. Russell, right of the Welsh WTC team, he has also made a top 5, and he also places Lucas in his top 5, 16 order dice Americans, as we saw last time. Now, Russell says that there's going to be a lot more Soviets than me and Alistair think. So he has Peter from Poland in with a 16 order dice Soviet mixed greatest hits. So all the best that the Soviets has to offer. Yeah, that might actually win a lot of games as well. I don't know Peter as a player, so that yeah, completely. The list is good. Then he has Phil from Scotland. Phil is a Scottish WTC player. He knows his Russians very much. He plays these all the time. I have played against him using his Russians. Yeah, he's a really good Russian player. He's got a 15 ordered Russian list with Bren carrier barbecues, but he's got no tanks, and that for me was one of the reasons why I pumped it down a little, because it is a weakness that's pretty obvious to see. So that will be interesting to see how he does without tanks. Pim, with his 15 ordered Soviets, mixed bag, flamer tanks. Talked about that one before. I also have that in my top 5. And then Christian Lingville, who brings a 14 ordered British list, which is a mixed bag with armor and no Gurkhas. So that's an interesting list. I don't think it will make top 5, but Russell clearly does, and he also knows Brits. He plays them as well, so it might. It might. It's got tools to do so, anyways. Right. Then we had John Ross of the American WTC team, who was the captain in Granada, and his top 5 is Danny's 17 ordered Americans with barbecue, armor, multi-rocket launcher, and Lucas with his 16 ordered pretty similar lists. So those two we've seen before. He also has Geordie in his top 5, so Geordie is all the good players are rooting for you, Geordie. And then he has Bjarke, who is the Danish national champion, who's bringing a 16 ordered Soviet list, a mixed bag, greatest hits list. So he's got all the greatest. And Bjarke's list also focuses a little bit on spamming a few ordered using people's militia. Bjarke loves his militia units. And then again, Michael Fee with his 15 ordered Polish. So that is what we think it will be. As soon as the tournament is done, I will do a meta recap, and I'll also try to record some games at the event. We're also trying to get the event set up with streaming. We don't know if the tech will support that yet, but we are trying to get that up and running, and it will all be featured on this channel. Right, that is Sealand Open. That is the meta. See you next time. Cheers.